Hello, and welcome to today's webinar, Navigating the Omnichannel Consumer Journey. My name is Ricky Bijlani. I'm the Senior Director of Marketing here at AUDIENCEX. I want to thank you all for taking a bit of your time to join us. I'm going to give us just a couple of minutes to let people finish joining us. And while I do, I'll go over a couple notes before we get started. First, we will indeed be sending a recording of this webinar to all registrants afterwards, so be on the lookout for that soon. Additionally, we'll have some time to answer any questions that you may have at the end of today's presentation. So if you do have any questions, you can go ahead and submit them anytime via the Zoom Q&A feature right at the bottom of the Zoom interface. Today, we'll take a closer look at the modern consumer journey, the omnichannel approach, and discuss how brands and agencies can best approach, develop, and continually adjust and adapt their strategies. Here to guide us all through a bit of that today, I'm pleased to introduce our presenters from AUDIENCEX, Danielle Gale, who is our VP of Partnership Solutions, and Tyler Kappen, who is our Digital Strategy Manager. Danielle and Tyler, thank you very much for being here today and hosting this discussion. I know it's going to be great. So with that, I am delighted to go ahead and hand off to you. If you can both briefly introduce yourselves, including your roles and background.
Hi, everyone. Thank you again for joining us, and Happy New Year, start of 2022. So I'm Danielle Gale. I look after our partnership solutions. So this entails working with direct clients on kind of understanding their just business goals and how that relates to media and how they could use media marketing to kind of drive revenue for them. I also oversee our strategy team, which is where Tyler sits on. And so I have a bit of a background from big agencies. So I've come over from Publicis Media Group out of Singapore. I've also spent some time at MNC Saatchi Performance, so definitely have a lot of experience, but we're really excited to talk to you about kind of omni-channel solutions, what's happening in the market, what you guys need to be aware of as we look at the consumer, today's consumer being an omni-channel consumer. But before we dive in, I'm going to pass it over to Tyler on my team. He could give a quick hello, and then we'll kick it off from there.
Yeah, thanks, Danny, and good morning to everybody on the West Coast. Good afternoon to anyone in any other location. I'm Tyler Kappen. I'm the Digital Strategy Manager over here. So I'm your sort of resident strategy nerd to talk about any sort of marketing activation, budget strategy, audience segmentation. We have plenty of content to kind of run through today that'll sort of paint the picture of what Danny and I do over here and how we think about strategy as it pertains to a client or brand's goals and objectives. So similar to Danny, I've got a little bit of an agency profile too. I've done a lot of brand work, but also a lot of performance marketing work. I've worked in TV, I've worked in search, I've worked in web dev. So even just within those three touch points, I mentioned three different channels, which is what we're going to be talking about today, is that full sort of gamut of channels that users are experiencing today, and why the importance of an omni-channel marketing approach could really benefit when looking at campaigns from the top-down view. So just looking through the agenda today, we're going to be running through that omni-channel approach, defining what it is between, how that's shifted over the past 10 years, 20 years, maybe 30 years, customer journeys and how it's digitized, how it's changed, and how it's evolved to the advantage of brands and advertisers. Building brand equity. Danny has some slides that are going to speak towards some of these segments of the funnel, where there's importance in certain areas versus others as it pertains to where you are in your brand lifecycle, and a case study that we can talk about where we've successfully deployed an omni-channel approach, and just kind of some tidbits as to what we looked at, just so we can see campaign success. But I mentioned before, that I had worked in a few different channels, and it really does speak towards the ease of access for marketers across all these user devices. We have a few stats here. We really like big numbers over here, especially as it, pertains to percentage of audience size. But 98% of Americans switch between devices in the same day. That already is speaking towards almost 100% share of voice, that users are fragmented onto different devices. When we refer to a device, that could include a mobile device, it could include a laptop, it could include a personal computer, it could even include the connected TV device. So, Even right now, I would challenge, anyone in this webinar to think about themselves as a consumer and how they're, in the cookie pool. How many devices do you have? Do you have, 8? Do you have 9? Do this iPad start stacking up? So, just as we look at this sort of, omni-channel experience and, the robust number size behind all of these audience figures, we really do see that marketers sort of face this, challenge to reach this consumer across all of their platforms. They want to limit any sort of fragmentation and really bring a unified message. And that's where the omni-channel approach kind of comes in. So I mentioned a few of the big numbers and stats before. Again, we like these big stats as it pertains to the audience size, but I'd say the area that I'd encourage you to focus on is really this graph on the right, where we've got mobile, we've got computer, we've got smart TV, tablet. Those 4 channels that I just listed all have different sizes. They all have different environments. They all have different use cases as well. Someone who's on mobile might be looking about something on YouTube, where something on computer might actually be running a Google search. So when we look at it like that, we really want to be able to put ourselves into a position where marketing channels can inform each other. If somebody is watching something on YouTube, how do we target them eventually onto their Google, onto a Google search on desktop? These are all sort of things that we think about, as that journey facilitates throughout our day-to-day. 85% of users on social media, 9 mobile apps used daily. We could see a highly mobile user, but we could also see them, tethered to some of their connected devices, like a connected TV that sits in their living room. I bring up this sort of omni-channel approach just because each screen and each device is going to have its own use case. The fun fact about TV is that it really is the only media channel that users rearrange the room in their the furniture in their living room for. So there's a lot of power behind the connected TV device as well. So all items of consideration, just as we look through the omni-channel approach and all the different devices at our disposal. So the omni-channel marketing approach, I brought this up, quite a lot of times. There's multi-channel marketing, omni-channel marketing. There's probably giga-channel marketing or some other acronym because our industry doesn't have enough. But when we're comparing these 2 graphs from the left to the right side, one is a multi-channel marketing push in which a lot of these channels are really pushing their message onto the consumer. When we do this approach, you can see that it's a little bit more fragmented. They're kind of just hanging off to the side, and the user is really sort of an endpoint. Whereas the omni-channel marketing approach really puts the consumer at the forefront and epicenter of all marketing activity. So the difference between this is that instead of having different channels sort of shouting messaging and media messaging and market, the omni-channel really puts the user in the center and uses each channel to inform placements, messaging strategy, creative strategy, and allows you to review the holistic customer journey just because we provided so many metrics about how it's fragmented today. So this omni-channel approach is really just kind of taking the user first as opposed to the brand first, and creating a target profile so that way we can talk to them through all of these different touch points, whether that's YouTube, Google search, digital display, or any of the other digital channels that we have access to. And when we're talking about the consumer, it really does go hand in hand with the customer experience and how the user is actually making their way to a conversion. So especially over the past couple of years, I think we're all very familiar and acclimated with this pandemic. And I think everybody on this call has in some way, shape, or form digitized some experience that they've had. Maybe you used to go into the bank, but over the pandemic, maybe you trust mobile banking a little bit more. And this is really at the forefront of what we see today with users basing their ratings off of their customer experience. A lot of these considerations come in because there is so much messaging in market. A poor customer experience can actually be a make or break when it comes to conversion. We especially see this in the mobile side of things. So when we are talking to advertisers, we do want to consider that mobile experiences are very, very clean, very, very good, and very, very user responsive. So, again, with some of these metrics, we are seeing that nearly 3 out of 4 users will appreciate companies that have very good customer experience. But as this is tied to the slide that we have previously, this still keeps the customer at that epicenter of all of our messaging and market and considers the customer experience side of things to ensure that conversions are actually happening. So I wanted to take one quick break here because I believe there is a panelist that, or there is a poll question that Ricky's deploying. Ricky, did you want to speak to that at all?
Yeah, so you should see on your screen a poll, that question that came up. The question is, are you taking an omni-channel approach to your marketing strategy? Yes or no? So here we just want to see where the audience is in terms of their omni-channel journey. We'll take this poll and we'll look to get the results and talk through it at the Q&A section at the end of this, the presentation.
Very cool. Well, thank you, Ricky. I had to get that to escape from my screen, so I didn't quite see the question. I think I remember which one it was you told me though, but just as everyone's kind of answering, if you haven't already, I can kind of voice over just, some of these considerations, as you're kind of thinking about your own omni-channel marketing approach. But there are challenges that are posed within this very vast sort of digital ecosystem where we have different placements. That includes things like omni-channel budgets. So, if you are segmenting your budgets between brand and performance goals, really understanding how you can allocate your media dollars effectively, but also thoughtfully. There are different KPIs that we're always adhering to. Sometimes that might be just a video complete. Sometimes that might be an action. The omnichannel budget should be informing those channel placements, so that way you can inform the overall objective and strategy as well. Difficulty tracking the customer journey is an experience that comes in even prior to the loss of cookies that are happening eventually later this year or early next year. The difficulty in tracking the customer journey really speaks towards all those different touch points. This can be solved through a lot of the different sort of identity graphs that are going through DSPs, cookie traffic tracking, retargeting. But ultimately, you want to have visibility into the customer journey, just because you want to be able to give credit to each channel that's informing the user at each interval of their customer journey. A user might be in a consideration phase, but that doesn't mean that some of the video views that they're receiving doesn't have value. The increase in technical expertise is really sort of a testament to some of the ever-evolving features of the digital marketing landscape. Within advertising technology, we've really evolved to where technical expertise is a little bit harder to come by. Previously we didn't have 30, 40 programs to master. Now that's pretty typical and normal. So the increase in technical expertise is something that's should be considered by most teams to ensure that the technical operations are still sound along their marketing campaigns. The consistency in brand messaging is another sort of creative solution that we think about. With the share of voice and media messages in market, it's really important to have a consistent brand message, just because there are so many different advertisers speaking to users from so many different verticals. It might not even be within your vertical even. There might be a lot of messaging in market from another advertiser, which can create some sort of either competition or a share of voice, share of page, and items like that. So when we think about brand messaging and the consistency in it, a lot of it's done through effective creative solutions, audience concentration, and really sort of an internal audit of what messages you're putting in market. And the last one we have here is the silos between teams. And even this one's important too, as you look, towards all the personnel dedicated to your marketing teams. Within these silos, there's a different varying degree of technical expertise, kind of similar to the third point that we have here. But a user that might be very well versed in Facebook might not be as well versed within search, or maybe a user might be very well versed in DV360, but maybe a little bit less acclimated in the trade desk. So these are all sort of considerations between these teams, to kind of consider that there's a varying degree of experience. There's a larger digital footprint in terms of the toolboxes used. So the silos between teams can create a challenge, which just sort of further emphasizes why the importance of speaking from each channel to the consumer has relevancy in almost every media plan. Okay, so just between a couple of these sort of examples, the traditional customer lifecycle is really that sort of macro level view. If we are really taking it down, stripping it out of the nuts and bolts of, what is the simple and traditional way that a customer lifecycle would occur? We have the discovery phase, the explore phase, the buy phase, and the engage phase. These are just 4 points, but over on the digital customer lifecycle, you'll see we have a lot more different points, scattered throughout this sort of, spherical graph that we have. And this includes viewing a banner ad, liking on social, eventually going to the Instagram page, maybe running a Google search, and then finally converting. Off of that, I just mentioned 5 touch points, which are already more than the discover, explore, buy, and engage. So again, this is really just how, this is really speaking towards, this is a user first market. Consumers are in a lot more control as to when they engage, where they engage, and how they engage. Each channel has its different role within any sort of media strategy, whether that's a CTV deployment versus a display ad. They might take care of two different things, but they almost always will have their role in terms of fulfilling a sort of KPI. And when we map the customer journey out, a couple of these slides that we have prepared are sort of forward thinking. Eventually with some of the data loss, data privacy, we still want to keep a visible eye on a lot of the customer journeys. And some of those solutions are through first-party data collection, first-party data builds, and housing a lot more of the user information internally. And what this does, through customer feedback surveys, service product usage analysis, and just even a stringent look on KPIs, this is really going to sort of map out the customer journey and where they're falling off, where they are providing feedback, and where there are areas of optimization. This is going far beyond just the messaging and market. We think of media as sort of that messaging vehicle, but when we look at the consumer journey, we really look at this as that sort of validation metric as to how we review the customer journey. Because we've spoken to the complexities of how this is digitized, how there is a lot more of a stringent focus on each sort of the funnel analysis and customer experience, it's really critical and crucial to understand how your user feels about you, even post-conversion. And gathering the audience insights is going to be another valuable way to utilize sort of the website technology and some of that first-party data information to really garner audience insights to further inform and create a picture. What we have here is an example of a pixel solution through one of our preferred partners, Distillery. Do a lot of great work with them, especially for audience discovery. But these are some examples of some of the observations we can make just from users visiting the site. This is all done through a pixel targeting or a pixel solution. So when a user is able to visit the website, we can collect some of these other common interests so we can further inform audience strategy. If I'm taking a look at this one, for example, we are seeing that financial advisors and those financially aware are likely to visit the site and eventually convert. So if we're building audience strategies and audience groups, that might be an area of consideration to test a budget against and run the audience segments against our current media strategies. So a few different tidbits and tips as to how you can gain a little bit more information about your audience and understand what interests are relevant towards them. Outside of that, I mentioned before building the persona from all of the consumer touch points. So when we are unpacking the consumer, I mentioned before that we did find out that there are some interests between the finance vertical, but how do we take that further? What are the other items that we look at? So, a financial advisor, what are their aspirations? What are their social media habits? Can we find them on Facebook, or maybe would LinkedIn be a better avenue to do so? These key influences and different sort of habits really do formulate that effective and accurate audience persona. And it lets us also test those once the media is deployed. So being thoughtful about your consumer is really advantageous because it gives you a lot more leverage to pull when you are creating different users and ad groups. So you can further validate that what you have strategized is actually proving out the results that you're after as well. And ultimately, the full goal that we have, especially as performance marketers, really is that acquisition. Once we get that acquisition, that's where we're in our sweet spot, right? We're all very used to CPA and CPA goals. But once there is that acquisition, once there is that actual purchase, what are the points in messaging that's going to be influencing any sort of advocacy or loyalty loops afterwards? We included this here just because, once the consumer has finished, their journey certainly isn't over. With additional exposure, word of mouth advertising, and the loyalty loop for any sort of appetite for repeat business, there is value in users that have already converted as well. We even see this within some of our first party data sets. If we do want to elicit further action, maybe a user that's already converted, we can take first party and implement that as a retargeting strategy. So that way we could build this loyalty loop. Again, I mentioned before that because there is so much messaging in market, there's different creative or competitors, different creative messages. Achieving this loyalty loop and achieving brand advocates is really going to help out in terms of the lifetime value of users and contributing to the overall business revenue. We love loyalty, we love repeat purchases, and we love opportunities to get in front of consumers wherever they are. So I'm going to take one quick pause and I'm going to pass it over to Danny. She's going to be talking about building brand equity just through some of the more upper funnel placements and what that could do for your brand.
Right. Thanks, Tyler. So before we jump into brand equity, I just want to quickly summarize kind of what Tyler has shared today. So omnichannel. Omnichannel is meaning advertising across multiple channels, but having a consistent message and attribution link, because consumers are no longer just on silo channels. Your users aren't only on Facebook. They're then not only on search. They're then not only on CTV online. We have to take a full channel approach when reaching customers, because a user may hear about your brand from a CT advert, right? They may then go online to search about your brand. They may go on and review customer reviews or look at your Instagram page to see how many followers you have. So at every touch point across this journey, we just got to make sure we're speaking to these users effectively and getting them coming to your site to learn more about you as a brand. And eventually, this is going to lead to higher brand equity. So at AUDIENCEX, we talk a lot about brand equity, but what is brand equity? So really, brand equity is a way users come to you as a brand versus over something generic. So it's something they find value in you as a brand and an advertiser, which would get them to select you over something generic or something alternative. So over time, kind of in the last 15, 10, 20 years, a lot of brands have been building equity in terms of storefronts. So if you go to any supermarket, you see a lot of short shelf life of different brands. You're able to kind of get your logos out in front of users, especially out of home advertising, people talking about your brand. This all builds brand equity. So being in front of your consumer. However, today, especially in the pandemic, it's ever more harder for brands to build on their equity. So really, a lot of these efforts need to come through advertising. And in fact, some research poll that actually 10 to 15% of a brand equity is built through their marketing efforts. So it's really important when looking at brand equity, taking an omni-channel approach, but also a full funnel approach. So given the choice today against a consumer, there's just so much choice of access. So you want to stay on top of mind of consumers and really being able to help them decide on what's different and what is going to be at a sale at stake. So Nielsen, as I mentioned, they make a point where 10% to 35% of a brand equity comes from marketing. So really, marketing needs to be in the forefront, especially getting in front of users. As I mentioned, it also comes from visibility, such as seeing, again, your product on a shelf or signage, or regular product uses, such as subtle reminder about an auto brand every time you drive your car. So every time you're getting into your car, you're actually, being driven through a Volvo, Lexus, etc. Now, when we talk about full marketing approach, there's a lot of two tactics most clients take. First, it's brand building or conversion. So users or marketers are either concerned about, big splashy, big advertising, or they're concerned about just short-term goals driving sales. But really, we need to take a full funnel approach. And when we think about brand building, we're really looking to influence consumers' perceptions about you as a brand. So we're not necessarily looking to convince them to make a purchase when we're talking about upper funnel tactics. So really, our reach in terms of targeting needs to be broad. It needs to be more long-term. And we got to understand that this effort is going to drive future sales. When we look at the alternative, kind of the lower funnel, kind of quick activation for performance marketing, really what we are trying to drive is influencers to make a purchase. We might use things as, sales or discounts, or really talking about kind of the USPs of the actual products or services you're selling, instead of focusing on you as a brand and kind of what you stand for. So really with conversion tactics, the messaging really needs to be geared to actual consumer purchases, what makes them decide to buy or to sign up to a service. And really our targeting needs to be niche and a bit more narrow, because really we want to find users who are in market for your product or service, versus if you're kind of going out into the market and building a brand, really we're trying to convince all users just to get introduced to you as a company, introduced to your services and products, not necessarily finding users right when they're ready to activate and become a customer. So conversion marketing, as we all know, drives immediate sales, but the emphasis of brand building is that it'll eventually drive future sales. Over time, too, we're seeing that customers are actually not converting as quickly as they tend to because so many new brands are coming into the market. So without knowing who you are as a brand, a user is less likely to convert. So it's essential when you're thinking about a full funnel strategy, really investing in kind of the broader brand messaging that you have and what you could offer consumers. So brand messaging is consistent. So we talk a lot about this. There's a ton of channels you could activate, but how do you maintain your messaging is consistent throughout the channels? And really what I want you guys to focus on is looking at the channels and understanding the use case of these channels for users. So when a user is going on Google search, they are looking for information. You know, they want to find something. They're putting in phrases, they're putting in big keywords. So your ad copy therefore needs to kind of match what users are searching. If you look at other channels too, like YouTube and Pinterest, they also have a very search-based nature. So people are going on Pinterest to find recipes, you know, they're looking for inspo for like a wedding planning party, or birthday gifts or Christmas gifts, etc., or they're looking to plan a road trip. So when you look at the messaging across different channels, you want to meet users in the way that they're interacting with the channels. So on Pinterest, if a user is searching for a vacation and if you are a travel brand, you might give them some inspiration about, you know, top things to take when traveling with children, or top places to visit in parks, in national parks. So really you want to change your messaging, not so much to be a consideration tactic, but meeting the user on how they're using the channel. Social, everyone uses social and Facebook, but really what users are using social for is to also find information about friends. It's much more community based. It's much more messaging and kind of, again, building relationships. So when you look at your creative across Instagram or Facebook, definitely when you want to make the use of hashtags, you definitely want to make the use of getting friends to also interact with your ad. Get friends to sign up, you know, use referral marketing tactics across social as well, because it is very community based. Other channels, you know, CTV and video. People, again, are watching shows on CTV, catching up. There are definitely ad breaks, but definitely sharing long tail videos, 30 seconds, 60 seconds could really be effective. But when we talk about consistency in terms of brand messaging, we really want to focus on the different channels and making sure those channels are finding those users in their use cases. Great. So a little bit about us, for those of you that don't know, you know, we are a full service trading desk solving the headache of the omni-channel complexity of today's marketing. So we've been in business for the last 12 years. We have offices all over the US. We work with over 350 brands and agencies, and we connect to over 24 platforms. But really what makes this difference is really solving the headache of how do you approach an omni-channel solution, not only in terms of media strategy or planning, but also in terms of attribution as well. So we are working on a multi-touch attribution where it'll actually look at all these different channels that you are driving for users and what is actually leading to conversions, what is driving that user to come up and convert. Next slide. Great. Here's a list of our DSPs and our kind of partners. So again, at AUDIENCEX, we have access to over 20 plus DSPs in almost every search and social platform you can imagine, which makes it very complex, right? So there are so many choices when you have for reaching consumers, but we have a solution to reach out to any user on any platform. We also work with a ton of data partners, distillery, Lotame. So we're leveraging these tactics on top of our DSPs and kind of social platforms to really fine tune targeting and reach consumers where they are. And a case study, we have done a great case study in terms of higher education. So I'm going to share this back to Tyler because he is kind of our niche expert when it comes to all things EDU.
Yeah, thanks, Danny. So, you know, just kind of reviewing some of the content that we had talked about, you know, it felt very fitting to bring in a higher education case study, just to sort of, you know, emphasize how we viewed this omni-channel approach and how it came with different audience considerations too. You know, since this is working within the higher education vertical, you can consider that the audience is likely going to be, you know, recent high school grads, community college transfers. The interesting thing about this is that the other audience we were considering were parents of these individuals. So, you know, parents with a high school student or parents with a highly likely, you know, child to go to college. When we think about these two audiences, they're two very, very different ones. You know, one might be found in a CTV environment if they're a little bit younger. Maybe the older ones, we might be able to have some success on Facebook. Maybe the younger ones might have some Instagram, but maybe there might be more Google searches from the older audience. So, you know, just within that, you know, we wanted to kind of consider a few of the items that we touched on in this deck. You know, what is the omni-channel approach? How can we sort of balance that user concentration between those audience groups? How can we look at those audience groups and further validate how they're performing and what sort of actions we want them to take? How do we keep a consistent brand message in market? Because a lot of the brand messaging that goes through, you know, takes a little bit of time to digest and understand from the user side of things. We take all these considerations and we match them up to both the channels and the flighting strategy. You know, when is, you know, a hot time for applications? When do we see the increase in applications? We did a robust, you know, sort of data review to you know, isolate and pinpoint those areas of opportunity. But ultimately at the forefront of this is really that omni-channel approach within that digital display environment. So, you know, using display to be a little bit stickier across the web traffic footprint. Social for some of the older audiences, some of the newer audiences, take advantage of some of the efficiencies we have there. Search, the demand capture piece of it, and a little bit even of the direct marketing piece, you know, to further drive applications. So ultimately, just the results of this, we drove a pretty prominent increase within the new applicants within the first term. The school was going through a little bit of that brand refresh, which, you know, by the campaign conclusion, had a pretty robust amount of exposed versus unexposed users. You know, ultimately increasing in, you know, applicant volume and a little bit more of a fleshed out brand profile, all contributed from that omni-channel messaging approach, the audience strategy, and a little bit of, you know, some gritty campaign planning, just to get it, you know, across the finish line. So ultimately a great example of higher education being, you know, omni-channel focus and what sort of tactics we can deploy to really tailor that to this digital ecosystem today. And with that, I have reached the end of the deck. So I believe we have, I can't see currently if there's a Q&A, Ricky, but if you could perhaps help while I'm taking care of the screen share.
Yeah, hey Tyler, yeah, hi everyone. So we just want to announce give the results of the poll question, and then we'll jump into the Q&A section. So the poll question, I'll just reiterate it, is the question was, are you taking an omnichannel approach to your marketing strategy? And so the audience here has selected yes. 78% of the people said yes. 22% have said no. Just wanted to get your thoughts on that percentage, Tyler and Danny. Are you, for the clients and customers you've worked with, are you seeing the same percentages, and any insight you can dive into that?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think the numbers a little bit where I'd expect it to. I mean, it matches up with some of the percentages that we had even within our users. There are sometimes some constraints that can prevent an omni-channel approach. A lot of the times it kind of comes from the budget side of things. That's not to say that we can't develop any sort of, brands and advertisers can't develop a walk, crawl, run approach. So, even if an omni-channel isn't being deployed right now, it might just be a little bit of a single channel like Facebook or something. There obviously is room to scale that later on. But ultimately, when we are thinking about this omni-channel approach, we might be working within this quarter, but maybe start thinking about Q2, Q3 now, just so that way, it could eventually be a little bit more of a robust marketing strategy.
Got it. And we got, thanks, Tyler. We got several questions here, so I'll just go through right here. The first question, and this was asked in the chat box. I don't know if everyone saw it, but I'll just restate it here. How do you determine the right mix of channels?
Yes.
And then the question that goes along that is, with the right mix of channels, how do you go about measuring cross-channel effectiveness?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I would say that, I would refer back to the diagram that we had used where, we had all of those different sort of channels around with the user at the center. And I would say that I would take a similar approach when it comes to, how you develop these and how you would segment your budgets. We can use different sort of forecasting tools, different digital estimates to understand, how many users are in market. If we're, just as an example, let's say we're looking for people that purchase, high-end cheese, for example, in Montana. That might be a little bit more of a stripped down user base compared to, a larger footprint. So once we can understand the number of users that we're running, we can do different sort of audience planning strategies to test budgets against that, determine the optimal frequency within each one, but also, tailor it to the KPIs that we are adhering to. So if that's, a lead form, actual, in-store foot traffic, those are all things that we can kind of test against each other to further validate. To bring up the second part of the question, just in terms of how we're measuring that success, there's a lot of different solutions we could use to, ensure that the consumer journey is still facilitating. So I mentioned foot traffic attribution as an example. We have different partners that can actually identify when a user's been exposed to an ad, then visited the store. Same thing with some of our display ads. When we have, our pixel solutions and a lot of our, tracking strategies, that does give visibility into what that user flow looks like. When are they converting? How many touch points did they reach until then? So I would say that there's a mix between, thoughtful audience planning to determine what those budgets are, and then, leveraging the tech solutions within the digital advertising ecosystem to further validate each touch point. And just a shameless plug, it all makes it a little bit easier too when it's all kind of executed through one partner, just so it's not in multiple pixel fires. It's all sort of unified and reviewable in one place.
Thanks, Tyler.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah. If you have any other questions, if we have, there were a few questions that came up. We'll look to address that specifically. There was a question on, how does your MTA model track the user across different platforms? We do have another webinar that's coming up mid-February that will go deep dive into that. So we'll have Benji, who is our analytics specialist, to go in there. It's a pretty detailed question, so we're happy to address that there. The other question was, how do you track any non-addressable channels like linear TV? And so along the same line, if you have any comments, otherwise, our next webinar is going to answer those questions as well.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So, for some of the more offline channels, just off the top of my head, I'm thinking, linear TV, radio, inventory like that. There is a little bit of a pain point just between some of the offline channels and the traditional online channels like digital. Obviously, for, someone who clicked on a display banner, they get to the site, we can, track that user, see exactly what time they hit. Offline TV is a little bit different. Or offline media is a little bit different because there isn't that path to click. There isn't that way to get the user on the site. We really are kind of banking on users seeing a TV spot, going to the website, punching it in. It's a lot more of a complicated user process just because they have to take a little bit of legwork on their own. In terms of measuring the offline success, one of the ways to do it is through spot attribution. So whenever a TV spot deploys, looking at a 2-minute window of site activity afterwards and seeing sort of like a spike analysis compared to, when TV is not running. What this does is it lets you see exactly what the impact of each spot has on your site. This comes with a couple caveats because you need a high impression volume behind that in order to generate signal. So it is a little bit of a less correlative to some digital channels, but that's not to say that some of the offline channels can't be measured through some of the MMM solutions and a little bit more of the advanced analytics. It's just going to be a bit more predictive as opposed to that one-to-one attribution that we take advantage of in the digital ecosystem. So I mentioned before too that every channel has its place. So I don't want to shame TV for not having that sort of digital component, because TV does still kind of do some of its work in some of the brand building phases of it, but maybe doesn't have some of the digital advantages as relative to the digital channels that we activate today.
Yeah, thanks, Tyler. So we're towards the end of our webinar. If anyone has any other questions, and some questions that are sent through, we'll definitely come back and answer those. So thank you, Danny and Tyler, for participating. And we want to thank everyone in the audience for attending today's session. The modern consumer journey today requires an omnichannel approach for brands and agencies to succeed. So, bottom line, there's a lot of strategies and tactics that can be done. So if you have any questions surrounding that, feel free to connect with both Tyler or Danny or me, and we're available to answer any questions. Even you can connect with us on social media. And just to reconfirm, we will be sending a recording of the webinar to all the registrants afterwards, so everyone can look out for that. Great.
Thanks, Ricky. And thanks, everybody. Have a great day and enjoy the rest of your week.
Bye.